Γνωρίστε τη μοναδική Σύρο, ή Σύρα όπως την έλεγαν παλιά, την αρχόντισσα των Κυκλάδων, με την πολυσήμαντη ιστορία που αποτυπώνεται σε κάθε γωνιά της. Πραγματικά θα εκπλαγείτε όταν μάθετε ότι η Σύρος, η ονομαστοτάτη των πόλεων, σύμφωνα με τους μελετητές της, είναι η πρώτη νήσος πόλης της νεωτέρας Ελλάδος που γνώρισε πρωτοφανή δόξα στο εμπόριο, τη βιομηχανία, την ναυτιλία, στα γράμματα και στις τέχνες. Και σίγουρα θα σας γοητεύσει από την πρώτη στιγμή η θέα μιας πόλης που απλώνεται αμφιθεατρικά πάνω σε δύο λόφους, σχηματίζοντας δύο λευκές πυραμίδες. Η πρώτη εικόνα λοιπόν είναι δύο λόφοι, δύο κόσμοι που δημιουργήθηκαν σε άλλες εποχές, με διαφορετικές τάξεις και κουλτούρες και διαφορετικά θρησκευτικά δόγματα. Από τη μια η Άνω Σύρα, η πρώτη πόλη, η μεσαιωνική, η πόλη των Καθολικών, που διατηρεί μέχρι σήμερα παράδοση αιώνων. Και από την άλλη η Ερμούπολη των Ορθοδόξων, η ρομαντική νεοκλασική πολιτεία που συναγωνίστηκε σε μεγαλοπρέπεια τις μεγάλες ευρωπαϊκές πρωτεύουσες. Η κάθε μια με τη δική της γοητεία σας ανοίγει τη φιλόξενη αγκαλιά της. Η Σύρος των αστών και των αρχόντων του 19ου αιώνα, αλλά και η απάνω Σύρα της λαϊκής γειτονιάς και του φραγκοσυριανού Μάρκου Βαμβακάρη, που με τα τραγούδια του την έκανε γνωστή σε όλο τον κόσμο. Όμως στη Σύρο δεν θα σας συναρπάσουν μόνο οι δύο πόλεις της, αλλά και οι θαυμαστές εξοχές και τα χωριά της. Και βέβαια οι υπέροχες παραλίες της με τα διάφανα νερά και τις ολόξανθες αμμουδιές. Ο καλύτερος τρόπος για να γνωρίσετε τη σπουδαία πνευματική και πολιτιστική κληρονομιά της Σύρας, αλλά και το πανέμορφο γεωφυσικό της τοπίο, είναι μέσα από τις οργανωμένες περιηγήσεις που σχεδιάζουν με προσοχή και υπευθυνότητα από το Γραφείο Γενικού Τουρισμού Teamwork του Παναγιώτη Μπουντούρη. Ακολουθήστε μας και στην ολοήμερη εκδρομή που με ιδιαίτερη φροντίδα διοργανώνουμε για σας, θα σας οδηγήσουμε με άνεση και ασφάλεια στα σημαντικότερα αξιοθέατα της Σύρου, όπου έμπειροι συνοδοί και ξεναγοί θα σας γνωρίσουν την ιστορία και τον πολιτισμό του νησιού.
Εδώ ο Χριστός δεν έχει κατηρήσει γιατί ο Χριστός είναι Χρήσιο.
Ελάτε λοιπόν, πάμε Σύρο.
Και εγώ και το Teamwork λοιπόν σας καλωσορίζουμε στο νησί. Το Teamwork διοργανώνει χρόνια τώρα εκδρομές και περιλαμβάνει στην ξενάγηση ό,τι καλύτερο μπορεί να δει ο επισκέπτης από το νησί της Σύρου.
Αρχικά επισκεπτόμαστε την Άνω Σύρα ή Απάνω Χώρα, όπως ονομαζόταν παλιά, που δημιουργήθηκε σταδιακά από τον 8ο έως το 13ο αιώνα και διατηρεί ακόμα το μεσαιωνικό της ύφος με τις καμάρες και τα στενά σοκάκια, τα χαμηλά στεγάδια, τις τρίφυλλες πόρτες και τις παστές γωνίες, τις τροφές των δρόμων για το ευκολότερο πέρασμα των ζώων. Σε περίοπτη θέση θα δούμε την πρωτομή του αρχαίου σοφού Φερεκίδη. Ενώ τα βήματά μας θα μας οδηγήσουν στον καθολικό καθεδρικό ναό του Αγίου Γεωργίου, τη Μητρόπολη των Καθολικών, που αποτελεί εξαιρετικό δείγμα εκκλησιαστικού μνημείου με θαυμάσιες τοιχογραφίες, ιστορικές εικόνες και καλοσμιλεμένα αγάλματα Αγίων. Θα επισκεφτούμε ακόμα την πρώην μονή Ιησουητών με το ναό της Παναγιάς του Καρμίλου του 17ου αιώνα και τη μονή των Καπουτσίνων με τον ιστορικό ναό του Αγίου Ιωάννη. Θα περπατήσουμε στην πιάτσα, στον κεντρικό δρόμο της απάνω χώρας, με τα δημόσια κτίρια, τους εκθεσιακούς χώρους και τα κάθε λογής γραφικά μαγαζάκια. Και θα φτάσουμε στην πλατεία Μάρκου Βαμβακάρη για να επισκεφτούμε το ομώνυμο μουσείο όπου φυλάσσονται τα προσωπικά αντικείμενα από τη ζωή και το έργο του μεγάλου ρεμπέτη. Στη συνέχεια θα μεταφερθούμε στη μοναδική Ερμούπολη.
Η Ερμούπολη, η πρωτεύουσα των Κυκλάδων, οφείλει την ίδρυσή της αλλά και την πολιτιστική, πνευματική και οικονομική της άνθηση στους Χιώτες, τους Ψαριανούς και άλλους πρόσφυγες που έφτασαν εδώ το 1822 και μέσα σε λίγα χρόνια κατάφεραν ένα πραγματικό θαύμα. Να πρωτοπορήσει και να ξεχωρίσει η Σύρα σε όλους τους τομείς.
Και ενώ όλη η Ελλάδα εκείνα τα χρόνια ζει την περιπέτεια του πολέμου, η Σύρα, προστατευμένη από τη Γαλλία, περνάει την ειρηνική και δημιουργική της επανάσταση, καταγράφοντας σε διάστημα μόλις 50 χρόνων μοναδικές πρωτιές. Το λιμάνι της Σύρας του 19ου αιώνα γρήγορα εξελίσσεται σε πρώτο διαμετακομιστικό εμπορικό κέντρο της επαναστατημένης και στη συνέχεια της ελεύθερης Ελλάδας, ενώ εδώ μεταξύ άλλων έγινε η πρώτη ανώνυμη ναυτιλιακή εταιρεία, το πρώτο ελληνικό ατμόπλιο, ο πρώτος φάρος, οι πρώτες βιομηχανίες, η πρώτη απεργία, το πρώτο τηλεγραφείο, το πρώτο γυμνάσιο, το πρώτο θέατρο όπερα της νεότερης Ελλάδας.
Έτσι η Ερμούπολη του 19ου αιώνα ξέφυγε από τα όρια του Αιγαίου και σύμφωνα με τους περιηγητές, εδώ στο βραχονήσι των 85 τετραγωνικών χιλιόμετρων άνθησε ένας λαμπρός πολιτισμός όμοιος με εκείνον των μεγάλων ευρωπαϊκών πόλεων. Αξίζει λοιπόν να επισκεφθείτε αυτόν τον μοναδικό τόπο για να θαυμάσετε τον νεοκλασικό ρομαντισμό σε όλο του το μεγαλείο.
Άπειρα μνημειακά αρχιτεκτονήματα, αδιάψευστη μάρτυρες της χρυσής εποχής, στολίζουν την πόλη. Καλυμάρμαρα δημόσια κτίρια, αρχοντικά με πλούσιο αρχιτεκτονικό διάκοσμο και περίφημες εσωτερικές τοιχογραφίες. Στη συνοικία Βαπόρια θα θαυμάσετε τα νεοκλασικά μέγαρα των παλιών εφοπλιστών και των καπεταναίων του νησιού και την πανέμορφη μικρή Βενετία. Και βέβαια τον Άγιο Νικόλαο, τον πολιούχο της Ερμούπολης που κυριαρχεί στην περιοχή με τον όγκο και τη μεγαλοπρέπειά του. Ο περίλαμπρος ναός που χαρακτηρίζεται από έντονη αρχαιοπρέπεια και αναγεννησιακά στοιχεία εγκαινιάστηκε το 1870.
Το 1848 άρχισε να χτίζεται μέχρι το 1903. Όμως είχαν μία σκέψη να φέρουν την Ελλάδα, αν είναι δυνατό, μέσα σε αυτόν τον ναό. Τι έκανα λοιπόν? Παίρνοντας την ζωηφόρο του Παρθενώνα, εκεί, ο Παρθενώνας έχει 92 τρίγλυφα και 92 μετώπες, ενώ εδώ στον Άγιο Νικόλα έκανα 93 τρίγλυφα και 93 μετώπες. Δεν ήθελαν να κάνουν ένα καινούργιο Παρθενώνα, ήθελαν όμως να κάνουν έναν λατρευτικό Παρθενώνα, γιατί εδώ ήταν ο πολιούχος αυτής της πόλης.
Στη μικρή δεντρόφυτη πλατεία μπροστά από τον ναό του Αγίου Νικολάου θα σας εντυπωσιάσει το ηρώον του άταφου αγωνιστή, το πρώτο μνημείο στον κόσμο προς τον άγνωστο στρατιώτη. Και ασφαλώς δεν θα μπορούσαμε να παραλείψουμε την επίσκεψή μας στο φημισμένο θέατρο Απόλλων, που χτίστηκε στα πρότυπα της σκάλας του Μιλάνου με σχέδια του Ιταλού αρχιτέκτονα Σαμπό. Το θέατρο Απόλλων, που γνώρισε μεγάλες δόξες, αφού από εδώ πέρασαν πλήθος ελληνικών και ιταλικών θειάσεων, παρουσιάζοντας σπουδαίες όπερες και θεατρικές επιτυχίες της εποχής, συνεχίζει μέχρι σήμερα τη μεγάλη θεατρική του παράδοση. Στο Μουσείο με τα αντίγραφα κυκλαδικής τέχνης θα έχουμε την ευκαιρία να θαυμάσουμε τα περίφημα ειδόλια του πρωτοκυκλαδικού πολιτισμού.
Ο πρωτοκυκλαδικός πολιτισμός της 3ης χιλιετίας π.Χ., που οι αρχαιολόγοι όλου του κόσμου τον ονόμασαν πολιτισμό καιρού Σύρου, μας κληροδότησε σπουδαία τέχνης αρχαιολογικά ευρήματα που ήρθαν στο φως το 19ο αιώνα στην Ακρόπολη Καστρί, στην περιοχή της Χαλανδριανής.
Στο Αρχαιολογικό Μουσείο θα δούμε αξιόλογα ευρήματα της κλασικής, ελληνιστικής και ρωμαϊκής εποχής από τη Σύρο και άλλα νησιά, καθώς και σημαντικά ευρήματα από την πρωτοκυκλαδική Ακρόπολη της Σύρου στο λόφο Καστρί. Στη μεγάλη μαρμάρινη πλατεία της Ερμούπολης, την πλατεία Μιαούλη, θα επισκεφτούμε το μεγαλειώδες δημαρχείο της, το αριστουργηματικό αρχιτεκτόνημα του Ερνέστο Τσίλερ, που φαντάζει σαν ανάκτορο, συνδυάζοντας υπέροχα τα αρχαιοελληνικά με τα ρομαντικά αρχιτεκτονικά στοιχεία της Δύσης.
Σας καλωσορίζομαι στο Δημαρχείο της Ερμούπολης, της πόλης η οποία είναι ιδανική, είναι ήρεμος και έχει πάρει και το βραβείο ως της καλύτερης και πιο ήρεμης πόλης της Ελλάδος. Σας καλωσορίζομαι στη Σύρο.
Και τέλος, περνώντας μέσα από την αγορά, θα φτάσουμε στον Ιερό Ναό της Κοίμησης της Θεοτόκου για να θαυμάσουμε την ομώνυμη αυθεντική εικόνα του Ελ Γκρέκο. Αφήνοντας πίσω μας την Ερμούπολη, θα έχετε την ευκαιρία να γνωρίσετε την νότια πλευρά του νησιού, που θα σας εντυπωσιάσει με την πολυμορφία της. Άγονες λοφώδεις πλαγιές, αλλά και έφοροι κάμποι με θερμοκήπια και καλαμιές. Εξοχικές επαύλεις σε πευκόφυτες περιοχές, αλλά και θαυμάσια παραθαλάσσια τουριστικά θέρετρα με χρυσές αμμουδιές. Ανάμεσα στα όμορφα χωριά της Σύρας ξεχωρίζει η πολυτραγουδισμένη Ποσειδονία ή Ντελαγκράτσια, που απλώνει τις μοναδικές ομορφιές της σε ένα ήρεμο καταπράσινο τοπίο από όπου ξεπροβάλλουν οι μεγαλοπρεπείς επαύλεις των μεγαλοαστών της Ερμούπολης του 19ου αιώνα. Ο παραλιακός κύκλος της Νότιας Σύρας σε κάθε στροφή μας αποκαλύπτει γραφικούς όρμους ή απάνεμες ακρογιαλιές. Έτσι θα γνωρίζουμε τις ωραιότερες παραλίες του νησιού: Αζόλυμνο, Βάρη, Αχλάδι, Μέγα Γιαλό, Αγκαθοπές, Φοίνικα, Γαλισσά και θα φτάσουμε μέχρι το γραφικό ψαροχώρι Κίνη με την απέραντη αμμουδιά και τα σμαραγδένια νερά που φημίζεται για τα μαγευτικά του ηλιοβασιλέματα. Σε κάποια από αυτές τις ελκυστικές παραλίες θα απολαύσετε το μπάνιο σας, ενώ αργότερα θα έχετε την ευκαιρία να δοκιμάσετε την τοπική εκλεκτή κουζίνα. Η όμορφη εκδρομή μας θα ολοκληρωθεί με την επίσκεψή μας σε ένα παραδοσιακό εργαστήρι λουκουμιών, ελπίζοντας έτσι να σας κάνουμε τις αναμνήσεις σας για την ωραία μας Σύρο ακόμα πιο γλυκές. Εκτός από την ολοήμερη περιήγησή μας που δίνει τη μοναδική ευκαιρία στον επισκέπτη να αποκομίσει μια συνολική εικόνα της Σύρου, το πρακτορείο μας, Teamwork, έχει προετοιμάσει επίσης ξεναγήσεις ιδιαίτερων ενδιαφερόντων με έμφαση στη θρησκευτικότητα και στη συνύπαρξη Ορθοδόξων και Καθολικών, με επισκέψεις στις σημαντικότερες εκκλησίες και στα μοναστήρια του νησιού. Στην ναυτιλία, με επίσκεψη στους φημισμένους ταρσανάδες και στο ναυπηγείο της Σύρου. Στην αρχαιολογία, με ξενάγηση στον προϊστορικό οικισμό της Χαλανδριανής και στα μουσεία. Στη βιομηχανία, με επίσκεψη στις παλιές βιομηχανικές ζώνες και στο μοναδικό στην Ελλάδα βιομηχανικό μουσείο. Στις εκπαιδευτικές απαιτήσεις μαθητών και φοιτητών ειδικών σχολείων. Στις ειδικές απαιτήσεις επιβατών κρουαζιερόπλοιων.
Το γραφείο του κ. Μπουτούρη και εγώ προσωπικά καλωσορίζει το μέλλον του ελληνικού πόλο και τους συνοδούς της ομάδας.
Στον αθλητισμό, με μεταφορές αθλητών στην πισίνα των Ολυμπιακών Εγκαταστάσεων του Αθλητικού Κέντρου Δημήτρης Βικέλας και στα γήπεδα ποδοσφαίρου, μπάσκετ, βόλεϊ και τένις. Όλες οι εκδρομές στο νησί γίνονται με ιδιόκτητα πούλμαν, πεπειραμένους οδηγούς και άψογα εκπαιδευμένους συνοδούς και ξεναγούς. Το γραφείο μας δραστηριοποιείται επίσης σε ενοικιάσεις όλων των ειδών και κατηγοριών των καταλυμάτων, καθώς και σε ενοικιάσεις αυτοκινήτων, σκαφών αναψυχής και ναυλώσεις αεροσκαφών και ελικοπτέρων. Είμαστε το κεντρικό λιμενικό γραφείο της Blue Star Ferries στη Σύρο και εκδίδουμε εισιτήρια με όλα τα πλοία και για όλους τους προορισμούς, καθώς και αεροπορικά εισιτήρια. Διοργανώνουμε επίσης θαλάσσιες εκδρομές για όλα τα νησιά των Κυκλάδων, αλλά και οδικές και αεροπορικές εκδρομές στους ωραιότερους προορισμούς της Ελλάδας και του εξωτερικού, σε συνεργασία με τα καλύτερα εξειδικευμένα τουριστικά πρακτορεία. Επισκεφτείτε την ιστοσελίδα μας και επωφεληθείτε από τις προσφορές μας. Ελάτε λοιπόν στην αρχοντική μας Σύρο και σας υποσχόμαστε εμπειρίες μοναδικές.
Welcome to Discovering Orthodox Christianity. I'm Stacey Spanos, your host for this series of programs designed to explain the basic teachings of Orthodox Christianity. We're honored to be filming at the Holy Cross Chapel on the campus of Hellenic College, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline, Massachusetts. In today's program, we'll discuss the House of God, iconography. Our distinguished guests are Dr. Helen C. Evans. She holds the position of Mary and Michael Jaharis Curator for Byzantine Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Thanks for joining us. And we also have here today Dr. Anton C. Vrain. He is the Director of Religious Education for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and also author of the book, The Educating Icon. Thanks for being here, Dr. Vrain. Let me begin with you. What is an icon?
An icon is any image of the holy that you use for veneration. We think of icons as wonderful images that are painted on wood, but the word icon is much more inclusive than that.
It doesn't necessarily have to be wood. What other types of mediums?
Any medium, a coin with an image of Christ or the Virgin, miniature mosaics, marble, wood, ivory. Many of the most beautiful ones from the Middle Ages are ivory works. Needlework. Vestments for the priests that have images are an icon in motion. There's nothing that couldn't be an icon if it has an image of the holy associated with it.
And let me ask you, Dr. Vrain, in the Orthodox faith, who can be on an icon? It's obviously not necessarily just Jesus.
Well, no, it starts with Jesus Christ, of course, but his mother, the Virgin Mary, the saints, John the Baptist, the great saints of the church, any saint of the church, but also then it gets into events. So you can have an icon of a particular event in the life of any of them, whether Christ, the Virgin, or a saint, or a moment in the history of the church. So Helen finding the cross, it becomes painted or depicted in an icon at some point. So the church has not limited itself just to portraiture. So it's got events and stories from antiquity, but there are even icons of things happening around us now, contemporary.
And there's a very distinct style that we see in most Orthodox Christian churches, Dr. Evans, but you were telling me earlier, this is not necessarily how you'll see all icons.
There is no one style for icons. The ones here in this church are, on the whole, beautiful evocations of the Middle Byzantine style. So the Virgin and Child and the apse are what you would see in churches around 1000. But they're Cretan icons in the Greek tradition, they're modern icons, they're Russian icons in a variety of styles, Bulgarian ones. To think that there is only one style is to not understand that these are a tradition that evolves. It's not a stagnant tradition.
Right. And then depending on when they were painted, whether it's from, as Helen said, from Middle Byzantine period, the 10th, 11th century, earlier, more recent, we can see the style of, even in a given school, changing over time.
Okay. If you look at the image of the Christ blessing on the stand behind you, that's an image that goes with the earliest icon that survives, the image of Christ at the monastery of St. Catherine at Sinai in Egypt. The pose is exactly the same, the book is open, the images look totally different, and yet they are the same image in essence. A bearded man with brown hair blessing and holding the word open for you to follow to him.
There are a lot of elements of the Orthodox faith that harken back to Judaism. Are icons one of those things? Did the Jews also have icons?
No, I mean, we know
this is a purely Christian.
Not quite.
I wouldn't say purely Christian, but we know that this was one of the debates about iconography in the late antique period of the church, the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Judaism, we would think of as an aniconic tradition, no portraiture of its figures and its events. And that goes back to the Decalogue, the Mosaic Law. I am thy God, and you will have no other gods before you. You will not make any images of God of any kind. And so Judaism doesn't develop that form of artistic representation. It does it in other ways. It decorates the temple and with all kinds of other elements, very decorative. We think of the Ark of the Covenant with cherubim on it, the Temple of Solomon with images of animals and plants of paradise and things like that, but no portraiture of figures. And so the Christians, and you can correct me on this one, begin to take that into a new direction fairly early on, though.
Where I would not disagree but say it's becoming more complex is that there's increasing attention being given by Jewish scholars to this site at Dura Europos in Syria that we know was destroyed in the 3rd century, and the synagogue there on the Torah wall has the life of Moses in detail and portraits of the prophets. Whether that is an anomaly, as one once argued, or more broadly based, and which Jewish communities, because Judaism, like Christianity, has many communities, is now a very interesting debate. In an exhibition I just did, it was part of that debate. The result is we're not so certain whether these are as separate as we would have argued in the late 1800s. But what certainly happens in the larger Christian world is that images are used to teach, and then in the Orthodox world they become increasingly part of the discussion of how to venerate the holy. And it's a huge debate because we have the iconoclastic controversy as part of it. It's not a simple everybody agrees.
Explain the controversy when it comes to icons.
Well, in simple terms, it's about 120 years of debate. It starts in the early 700s, 725, some people give it the debate, that the Byzantine emperor, the church at that time, begins to say, this is idolatrous. The behavior that people have towards icons, the veneration, the incense, all these things.
That we're worshiping idols.
That we're worshiping idols. And as a kind of a religious reform movement, as I would think about it, it's decided that we won't do this and we'll ban them. And to keep the story simple, a number of church conferences are held to decide this, and ultimately the church bans any type of iconography, any type of artwork, and we get this practice called iconoclasm, icons being destroyed, the breaking of icons. And initially there's resolved at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, 787, and the church comes around and says, no, this is part of the authentic Christian tradition to have iconography, but also to use them as aids in our worship and our prayer.
Because we're not worshiping to the icon itself or to the image of the icon. What's going on in
and
the
that was
Orthodox faith?
actually part of the debate, and the insight, I think, that was so genius for its time was that the act of veneration, the kissing of the icon, the bowing in front of it, the procession, is being directed not at the image, not the wood, not the paint, as John of Damascus would have said back then, but to what it's being depicted. So the idea that and an idea from how they venerated the emperor at the time, the honor given to the image passes through to the prototype, who it is really. To put that in our terms, if your grandparents look at a picture of the grandchildren and they hug it and they even kiss it, what's being kissed? Is it the grandchild, or is it just the glass and the paper that the picture is printed on? And the same exact argument was being made at the time of the Seventh Council. But the debate continued for about another 40, 50 years, and it really doesn't resolve itself until 815. And it's finally, once and for all, icons become part of the tradition, no more challenges at a grand scale.
And Dr. Evans, I have also heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the icons were widely used in the early church, especially as a means to educate people at a time when people were mostly illiterate.
Well, there are certainly early writers that talk about using the images as educational tools, and I'm sure that that is true. That's in all Christian communities. Again, it's the transformation of them into a means for spiritual veneration, a way to reach the holy by contemplating an image that is what makes it really, to me, an icon in the Orthodox world, as opposed to a picture in a Roman Catholic Church. And then the Protestant faiths tend to reject saints in general.
Explain to us what we're seeing here of this bank of icons in front of the altar.
Well, it's a wonderful iconostasis, but why I find it particularly wonderful is it is an effort to revive one of the earliest stages of the screen between the congregation and the most sacred part of the church, the apse with the altar. So you have what are evocations of what would have originally been marble panels, and the tall columns and the architrave across the top. And in the beginning, there may have been nothing where the images are now, and then there may have been curtains, and then they began to put icons in there. And by the later centuries, you have the great screen of images. But here what you have is the consistent ones: Christ, the Virgin, John the forerunner, John the precursor, the Baptist, and then the saint, or in this case, narrative that goes with the specific building. This is the Church of the Holy Cross, and it's the finding of the Holy Cross with Constantine and Helena behind me. So,
is every church laid out like this? Every Orthodox church?
Basically.
Those are the rules.
Basically.
Explain to me. Well, first to the right.
Well, you start with Christ in this position, then always next to him is John the Baptist, John the forerunner. What happens after that will depend on the width of the space and what needs there are to fill that space. The doors then, because there's a door at the end of in this instance, will frequently have an angel, Gabriel or Michael, depending on which door it is, or a deacon, because these doors are often called deacon doors. So the deacon, who's a saint, Saint Stephen, the first martyr, other deacons may be depicted there. And then to our left, you have the Virgin Mary, and then the name of the church. So it's very standard across all Orthodox churches. Will use this basic layout. Some churches then will go higher, add rows, and that was an even later development. And so you'll see saints, events in the life of Christ, prophets, depending on how high up they go. Especially in the Russian tradition, they might go all the way to the ceiling.
And let me ask you about this part above these doors here. In my particular church down in Florida, there is an eye. And here is the Last Supper. Thank you. Anything goes at that point? It's up to the church, or who makes that decision?
The tradition has been more dominant to use the Last Supper. to my knowledge. It's because this is the table, it's the entry to the table, and the table that the Eucharist is going to be celebrated on, the table at which we're gathered around with Christ to share in the Last Supper. And so the icon over the door saying, this is reminding us of this is why we're gathered, to share in this meal.
This is not the most ornate church I've been in, but it's certainly very beautiful because it's got significance, because it's here at the seminary. Are other churches more modest? And is that okay?
It's certainly okay. And there are churches of all types, from those who can afford the most elaborate, as when Justinian built Hagia Sophia, and to those who have much less money, who would be among the first Greeks coming to America in the first generations. You bring into the church what's the core of your faith, the need to separate the congregation from the clergy by a barrier, and that barrier should carry images that speak of what is important about the faith, and the quality of the painter determines how great the icons are.
Let me ask you, are all Orthodox churches, when they have icons up, are they all in the Byzantine tradition?
No.
No, and that points, to me at least, that points to both when they were built, the aesthetic concerns, the artistic concerns at that given moment.
Because that's what I think people associate it with, that Byzantine look.
But you see churches, especially I would say from the 16th, 17th, 19th century for sure, early 20th century, where the art begins to take on new forms. It changes. We would say it becomes more Western because of the influence of the movements in art around the world, especially the Renaissance, etc. So this traditional, very Byzantine style it had developed over time, but it was, I would say, the mid-20th century rather. To this day, this became a revival, saying, wait, we need to kind of get back to our sources. And from the historic examples from a much earlier time. And so this Byzantine style was essentially revived and has become much more dominant today than it would have been 70 or 80 years ago, even in Greece.
And Byzantine is an empire that lasts 1,000 years. Its art evolved throughout that period. So even when you're saying a Byzantine style, if you're talking about the icons of Crete, they're a much more animated tradition than the revival that is in this building, which is deliberately evoking, give or take a century or two, the year 1000.
So what other styles are there of icons? Because of course I grew up in the church, so this is what I've come to identify it with, but
well, we both might have different terms, but they're the first icons which survive primarily at the monastery of St. Catherine at Sinai. They're the icons that evolve in what we call the Middle Byzantine period, which is a period of great power for the imperial center at Constantinople. I keep looking at this iconostasis and realizing that the Virgin and the narrow columns beside her look very much like an ivory icon of that period that we own at the Metropolitan Museum. Then you have the latter years, the late Byzantine period, the post-Byzantine period, when there is an interest in much more detail. A scene will tend to have secondary stories behind it, and they are much more animated. And then in the post-Byzantine centuries, by the late 19th century, you have icon painters who are reflecting the European tradition of a more volumetric figures, and each of those in its own period is very much the style. And perhaps if you were in a Russian church, you would be doing a revival of Stroganov icons or Novgorod icons. There are more variations than we think because the themes are more limited. We do images of the Virgin in certain poses because they carry great sanctity. The image of the Virgin and Child behind me is the Virgin Hodegetria, not in the iconostasis, but on the stand.
Behind us.
That's the Virgin pointing toward the child, showing the way to salvation.
The picture on the stand. The icon and the stand behind you there.
It comes from a monastery in Constantinople. If you had traveled to Constantinople, you would want a copy of the Virgin Hodegetria because you have seen it there. It was a miracle-working icon, and eventually it becomes the belief that the evangelist Luke when he paints an image of the Virgin and child when they are alive, that's the image he paints. But that's a much later tradition, and yet one with a great appeal and a desire to know what these people really look like.
Might that have been the first icon?
It's unlikely that Luke actually painted it.
Actually, what's frequently called the first icon is the one that's at the top of the apse here, this veil, this cloth. There's a legend from antiquity that says that a king, King Abgar in Edessa, was ill and heard about this teacher, Jesus, and he's a healer and wants to be healed by him. And so he sends a servant to bring Jesus or bring something of Jesus to be healed. And Jesus presses his face into a cloth, and I'm shortening the story a bit, presses his face into a cloth, and his image of Christ is transferred to the cloth, and then he takes it back, the king is healed, and this cloth is hung in the city for centuries.
And from the city, it's carried to Constantinople
right.
in the reign of Constantine VII, and then it is in some way lost in the Fourth Crusade. And when I went to borrow the earliest one that survives, it's probably an icon from the Balkans, perhaps Serbian, that is in Lyon in France, that we can track the Catholic bishop that takes it. And it is presumably an icon not made by human hands.
Right.
We have absolutely no idea what the image that was actually carried to Constantinople looks like.
Right.
This is the tradition of what we think it looks like. This looks very much like the one in France, but whether that is the original one,
it's not around anymore. So
and allow me to ask this question: how do we know? And are these accurate depictions of what the Theotokos looks like? Is this what Jesus looked like?
It's what we want them to have looked like. We have no
documentation.
There are no descriptions of either of them.
The Gospels don't say the tall brown-haired man with a beard went out and raised the dead. We have found these to be, in a way, comforting to all Christians.
And yet, when you look over the centuries, you realize the face of Christ, the hair, the eyes, they change. You go to Ravenna, Italy, and Christ is a young man, clean-shaven, looking like a Roman nobleman of the time. And then by the time you get to them, much later, he acquires a beard, the dark hair, things like that. In other cultures, all of a sudden, he becomes more red-haired, fuller face, different color eyes.
And Dr. Evans, you told me something. The depiction of Christ may reflect the culture of the time, but it's the essence of Christ that's the most important.
It's very much, I think, the essence. The 4th century sarcophagi, which are some of the earliest images that we have in the Christian world, he's usually completely curly-haired and looks like he's 12 years old. And even when he's being crucified at 30, he looks like he's 12. We, in the first centuries of the Christian world, certainly knew him as a very historical figure. We knew where he was born and where he lived. By our time, which is 2,000 plus years after his life, and for several centuries before that, he was much more an essence that we wanted to associate with our own cultures. And that's when you begin to get Scandinavian blonde Christ and Ethiopian Christ. It's when his historical reality isn't as important to you as the essence of his meaning. In these, you have kind of a hybrid. We don't know what he looks like, but he certainly could have been in the Holy Land looking like this, and he would have looked like an inhabitant.
Yeah. But then when you get into the icons of saints, I think that's what you see something different taking place. Then all of a sudden, characteristics that the saint must have had in life are now showing up in the icons. John Chrysostom usually has a very short beard, as I have. St. Basil the Great always has a very long, pointy beard.
And do we have historical documentation? That's how they look?
Of course not.
I don't believe so, but the fact that their icons were being painted fairly quickly after their deaths says to me that the painters, the community wants to remember them, and they pick up those characteristics that were unique to that individual And then the tradition, because it's artistically fairly stable, retains that. And then somebody writes down a book, if you want to paint an icon of this saint, he has a long brown beard, he has curly hair, he holds this, he's dressed like that, so that there's a normative tradition of how to depict Saint so-and-so.
Sure. Let me ask you, Tony, we've heard about icons that cry. How does the Orthodox Church view those?
We leave it up and say it's one of these mysteries. We don't understand how it happens, why it happens. We can find explanations all on both sides of the equation of why an icon is crying. It's a long tradition of that, miracle-working icons, but when you get into the crying icon, some will say, well, it's because the saint or the Virgin is a frequent crier. Sorry to sound disrespectful, in icons. She's upset about the world, and then the same person says, no, she's happy about something else. And so again, I think we begin to ascribe some of our sensitivities about what we see going on around us, and then this event that seems to have no explanation, and people get investigating and look behind them to see and look for the little trick that somebody may have played, and those kinds of, and then we put our meanings and our concerns to the image. And that's, I think, part of the beauty of the icon. We bring ourselves to this image. We want this relationship with God, and we find it in the icon because we're visual people. It's hard to abstract my relationship to the Virgin Mary or Christ, but when I can look at his image, I can form a relation. I can help in that relationship to Christ or the Virgin.
Dr. Evans, is there a standard for creating an icon, or is it basically up to the skill level of the artist?
There's not a standard, but there are, as Tony was talking about, there were books that began to be written that said it goes back as far as St. Peter, but St. Peter has short curly hair, St. Paul has a high forehead, which is a symbol of being a learned scholar, and so that if you're going to do these images, you should be working within that tradition. Beyond that, it is the skill of the painter.
Can I create an icon?
Yes,
or you can
anybody can create an icon. It's an image that you then use as a way to approaching the holy. So in a way, to me, an icon is more what you do with it than whether you hire Michelangelo to paint it or me. Except you would get much better art with Michelangelo.
Yeah, people ask me if there are bad icons. I said only the ones I could paint, because I can't draw a straight line.
Well, let me ask you, I mean, we've all seen controversial forms of art over the years. Is there a point at which an icon or an artist can create something that could be considered sacrilegious?
Sure. Very, I would say, controversial or really very jolting are some iconographers, contemporary iconographers, who I can think of one in the head, in my mind, who kind of strips the image down to its barest of essentials, and you would have the figure in color, but if he's holding a book, it would be etched in, and you wouldn't see it until you get very, very close. But when you look at the execution of the face, you say, my gosh, this is very traditional. Mm-hmm. But yet when you pull the image back, or the color palettes, 4 colors, you go, this is strikingly different. And you're like, wow. And I might say, wow, do I want that in my church? Do I want to pray in front of that? Maybe, maybe not. People are going to react to it differently, just as we react to all art forms.
Right. Dr. Evans?
There are contemporary artists who, in fact, have given up the image and use luminescence. So kind of the essence of the image, which isn't, to a degree, what the Hesychast movement thought that you, or thinks that you can see when you contemplate in the right way, that you see the light around Christ at Mount Tabor. Those artists would say that by looking at and contemplating these images, which are only light, you are drawn to trying to draw the figure, draw the essence yourself. I would imagine that most congregations coming into a church with an iconostasis that perhaps had a red panel and a blue panel and a yellow panel would not know what they were looking at. Right. But it might be incredibly meaningful to others. It's what you know and what you bring to it. The works are done with great dedication.
Some people use the phrase, write an icon, not paint an icon.
Oh, that one makes my teeth grate all the time. I think
If you look at the Christ child up in the apse, that's as close to writing an icon as I think you can get.
yes.
But I also have trouble with that term.
It's also
What do they mean?
part of it's a linguistic problem. The word to make an icon, ikonographos, means to write an
write
icon,
an icon,
literally.
yes, literally,
but
correct.
in Greek, that means write anything, any kind of text. But it's also the same word to paint. So zoographos in modern Greek means just to do a portrait. So so it would literally, that which literally means life writing. So people have heard that and said, well, therefore I am writing an icon, not painting an icon. But if you ask the iconographers, they says, no, I'm painting. I'm using paints and colors and things like that. What I think the idea is getting at is kind of interesting is in icons frequently says by the hand of. It's inscribed as if there was an author, not a painter. Or the idea that when we begin to look at the icon, we can read it because we can see the story, we can see details in the life of the saint or the event that we can now read. And so this idea that the icon, like much of art, becomes, as the anthropologists would say, a text that we now can study, we can reflect on, we can learn from, and contemplate.
And as we see in this church, icons do not, well, we've talked about it, do not have to be painted. They can also be tile mosaics.
They can be anything. We have in this church painted icons. We have over in the reliquary container ones that are in many other media. It is a relatively late development in the Orthodox world when icons come to mean painted panels, and in fact it's only relatively late that panel paintings become the dominant form of icon. If you're looking at the period that this installation refers to, truly ivories are more popular than panel paintings on wood. Panel paintings on wood originally are a lot cheaper than mosaics. So the image of the Virgin in the apse here is a mosaic, and that was the most luxurious, the most expensive form of image, and many of the works that we think of as the greatest icons, again around the year 1000, are in fact mosaics, which are then copied and in varying ways on panel paintings that remain alive today. Right. So it moves, and then frescoes are cheaper than mosaics, and panel paintings on wood are cheaper than painting on a finished fresco. You always have to add, how much money did you have to spend?
Of course.
Right,
And
it's critical.
let me ask you, Tony, can we be considered icons?
Sure. If each one of us is created in the image and likeness of God, the word image is ikona. And so there's something in each one of us that contains the holy within us and can radiate that in our relationships to other people, the world around us. We ask that of kids at camp all the time, and find the icon. And the best answer, and this is for all the kids out there, grab the kid next to you and lift him up, because the person sitting next to you is an icon created in the image and likeness of God.
Dr. Evans, let me ask you about the significance of something that the Orthodox faith holds dear. It's called the Sunday of Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that tradition.
Well, the Sunday of Orthodoxy is the Sunday that celebrates the Second Council of Nicaea, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, when icons are again authorized to the church. And so that is very important. It is the reason that you have an iconostasis in this church. It is a central moment in the history of the Orthodox faith, and ultimately it comes to have its own icon, where you have those who were martyred for their defense of icons grouped around originally an image of the Virgin and Child, and then eventually sometimes you get many more icons. It's a very, very definitive moment when you look at the history of what defines the Orthodox Church.
And it's celebrated the first Sunday of Lent in all Orthodox churches, because it commemorates when the iconoclastic controversy finally ends in 843. It's proclaimed on the first Sunday of Lent that year. And so it becomes known as the Sunday of Orthodoxy, the triumph of Orthodoxy, being the ultimate restoration of icons and the iconic tradition within the church.
Well, Dr. Evans and Dr. Brame, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to see more programs in this series, Discovering Orthodox Christianity, please visit youtube.com/Greek Orthodox Church. I'm Stacey Spanos. Thanks for joining us.